Yeah.
Yeah.
Good evening, everybody. Good morning, or whatever time of day it is. I hope it's good for you. And I continue to this day to be John Atack, and Christian Szurko continues to be Christian Szurko, or Zurko, as people usually call you, eh?
Yeah.
Do you want
Yeah.
to say it properly for me so that we have it on record?
Szurko. That's a long
Szurko,
U. Szurko.
Szurko.
Yeah.
Excellent. Go.
Zerko is fine. It's what I get all the time. And it keeps people from falling over.
Yeah, well, I mean, people keep, year in, year out, keep calling me Attack, and
Yes.
I'm not Attack. I'm a human being. Um, but my name, in fact, Ack means under the oak tree. It's got nothing to do with being horrid to people. Not to say that I won't be if somebody annoys me, obviously. So I was delighted that we finally managed to do something about your internal reality control model because I think it is really significant. I think it's an excellent way of looking at things
Thank you.
without all the psychobabble that so often gets
Mm.
attached. It's straightforward, cuts to the quick. And as Cat Stevens said, the first cut is the deepest. Is that in fact true? You know, we wonder about it.
No, I understand that usually,
The
except when
second cut is
people
deeper.
when people aren't used to attacking with a bladed instrument, I understand that the first cuts are rather hesitant.
Yeah,
So
shallow.
so this
But a
song,
song called "The First Cut Is the Shallowest." Rod Stewart wouldn't have had a hit with that, would he? I didn't
that's
even know it was a Cat Stevens song until last
yeah,
year or something.
yeah.
So,
I was informed of that by the person who introduced me to the Cat Stevens albums way back in, what was it, 71 it would have been.
Mona Bone Jacon.
He happened to have, because he'd gone to concerts and things, and he was like really into the guy.
Hmm. Oh, he's
Uh,
absolutely brilliant. And I mean,
yeah,
you met him at various mind, body, spirit festivals, didn't you? And
yeah. Well, one in particular, yes.
oh,
Yes, that's a whole
there's a whole other.
other story, which probably we can do without.
I think
Uh,
we will.
yeah.
So today we're going to talk about the um, decorative map that you have behind you.
Yes. We're
Um,
going to talk about what I say instead of the word cult.
yes, which is extremist, authoritarian sect.
Yes.
Yeah. So that we don't use the C word and upset people. Because it's become rather muddy. It's like the arguments about the word brainwashing and whether we should or shouldn't use it. And I think there's just a point where something has so many associations. I
Yes.
tend not to use the word hypnotism because it upsets people. And you kind of go, well, actually, it's pretty straightforward what's going on here. But once you say, look into my eyes, people think it's something else,
Yeah.
which it isn't.
Well, in my case, I discovered, because my focus is on talking to people in the groups. As
Mm,
soon as the word cult comes up, you've switched them off, you've lost them.
yeah.
Even sometimes people who have left their group, but who aren't ready to say, I was in a cult.
Mm. Well, I was interested, I've just come off the board at the Aftermath Foundation
Hmm.
and I said I'd only be with them for a few months
Yeah.
and I've done that. And I was still on good terms with them. But when I looked at their website, I think there were 37 recommended books,
Hmm.
all of which were autobiographies of ex-members,
Yeah.
including Robin Scott's justification of how brilliant Scientology is. I did suggest they take that one off. But I found out that they don't want to put a book on there that's got the word cult in the title. And,
Yeah.
so cults in our midst, combating cult mind control, it's kind of hard to find the
I
relevant
agree.
text. And if it's going to say, if somebody's going to go, I mustn't look at that if they're phobic because of the word cult, then yeah, we have to go somewhere else. We have to reframe the problem.
And it was even at the point where there were some groups that were having teachings for their own members about, quote, cults, unquote. So now you are talking to an ex-member potentially, or somebody who's just thinking about reevaluating their membership. And they know what a cult is. A cult is everybody else. So
Hypnotism is swinging a watch.
I had a Hare Krishna person explain to me that they knew that the Unification Church was a cult and Scientology was a cult, and and so on.
Yeah.
But they would never, ever have entertained the idea. Whereas if I talk about this in purely descriptive terms,
Mm.
to me, extremism, authoritarianism, and sectarianism are symptoms that are descriptive rather than a label, which going back to the 70s and 80s, we were talking about so-called sex cults. We were talking about, taking people off in a bus at 2 o'clock in the morning to the middle of California, someplace where nobody could get out again. And you were there for 3 days, which turned
A
into
3-day
7 days,
workshop.
which would turn into 21 days, which
Mm.
becomes 40 days. And the next thing all of those kinds of things got in the way of actually having a conversation.
Mm.
And
Yeah,
whatever
because
was
if it's
in
a
the
cult, they must do this.
yes, and whatever was in the newspaper, that was what people thought, and that still goes for I still will hear from somebody, is this a cult like Nexium? Because Nexium was one of the big ones in the newspaper not so long ago, and it was made a big splash. And then you have to explain every group has its own way of operating. Sometimes there's overlap, sometimes there's not overlap. And all you can do is look at the individual group, the individual leadership, the individual methods, and work from there.
Mm.
And, media people don't necessarily want to hear that. Families don't get it because they're worried and anxious.
Mm.
Um, it just, right back, I guess it was 83, 84. I was already tired of the word
Mm.
because it wasn't helping me to communicate. And as I say, it was turning people off.
Mm.
Are you going to call my group a cult? Now you have just told me that whatever else I do, I can't use that word. I better have some other way of saying
Mm.
what I really mean. I'm not accusing you. I'm not accusing Unification Church people of being like the children of God. No, because they're different. I'm not accusing the Hare Krishna people of being like the Divine Light Mission because they're different, and so on and so
Mm.
on. So I just started groping around for different phrases, and this is the one that I landed on because, to the best of my ability, it purely describes what I'm trying to say.
Yeah.
So, it's not that I'm going to chastise people for using the word if they want to use it. It's just that I want to stay away from that emotive, hurtful context
Mm.
and stay in, does this happen? And how bad is it when it happens?
Mm.
So
Yeah, very much so.
each of
So,
these words happen on a scale, and they have an opposite, which is healthy. Like
yeah.
I said last time, I want to talk about what is healthy and then figure out what is the disease from the healthy condition rather than start with the diseased condition. And as you said, whatever's left over must be healthy, which maybe isn't the case. It may be another kind of a disease. To me, this allows me to say, what is a healthy, safe kind of group dynamic to be in,
Mm.
and then look for the variations from that and see how bad they are.
Yeah.
So that's what this is all about. And it just means I don't have to insult anybody along the way as well.
Mm. I mean, I
I
too
know,
came to the word authoritarian some
yeah,
while ago. It's quite usual to hear totalitarian or totalist
mm,
words, these words used about high demand or high control groups. And I've never sat well with high demand or high control. There's just something unpoetic about these words. Don't work for me. But
mm,
authoritarianism, so totalitarianism, the word came along because of Benito Mussolini, and he was a total authoritarian, and so we got totalitarian. And I started kind of looking at it, and in the first edition of Opening Our Minds, which was called Opening Minds, I did use the word totalist.
mm,
And as I thought about it, it was sort of, well, total authoritarianism, any authoritarianism, as far as I'm concerned, is a bad thing. And
yeah,
let me clarify what I mean by that. That there are two types of authoritarian. There are authoritarian leaders and there are authoritarian followers. And
mm,
authoritarian leaders are people who, claim themselves to be godly in their powers and have a total belief in themselves. So they're usually suffering from some kind of narcissistic disorder.
yeah,
And authoritarian followers are people who don't think they're clever enough or have enough to make the decisions. They don't feel confident, and they give their internal reality control, to use your model. They give that over to somebody else and say, well, I don't know what to do, you do it. I would reckon that probably about 60% of people fit into that. And I would like to change that. I'd like to have, because if we're going to have democracy, we need 51% of people who don't just do as they're told, or follow on, or it must be all right because Donald Trump says it's all right, or Joe Biden, I don't mind who. So for me, that's the simple idea of authoritarianism, that authority is given to the leader by the follower. Do you like to expand on that a little?
I think that's an important point to make, is that authoritarianism really is a kind of dance of death. Ultimately, it's a partnership where one person doesn't have some kind of magic charisma or some kind of magical and irresistible appeal, but rather that certain kinds of people appeal to certain other kinds of people.
Yes.
Who respond to that, which is why you can get somebody who listened to a Benjamin Creme and think this guy's the bee's knees, and other people listened to him and thought he has lost his mind and walked away from him. Now, I saw this when I used to go to the festivals of Mind, Body, and Spirit in London, and he was there some years, and there were some people who just couldn't get enough of him, and other people heard about 4 sentences and just shrugged their shoulders, smirked, and walked. There were some people at the Rajneesh stand who kind of, oh my gosh, this is the beginning and the end. And other people who said, "Meh," and walked away.
Bagman, bagman.
Yeah, you can find that with every kind of authoritarianism, that there are certain kinds of appeal that reach certain other kinds of people who have that particular emotional or other need. And that when the two find each other, they click.
Yeah.
Whereas other people walk away. There are people who are saying right now that Trump is this authoritarian leader. Well, yes, he is, but he only appeals to certain kinds of people. He's not taking over all Americans. There are people saying, well, those evangelical Christians have all gone crazy for Trump. Actually, in terms of numbers, no. There's a certain kind of evangelical who call themselves Christian. They're part of this evangelicalism that America has. They want that kind of figure of authority and power. But the rest of the Christian church are looking at that and saying, didn't sign up for that. So you have, and then you have people all the way in between those two extreme reactions. So I think you're right there. We have to recognize that the followers make the leader as much as the leader makes the followers.
Yeah.
And now we're at intelligent disobedience and courageous followership.
Back to Ira Chaleff. Yeah.
Back to Ira Chaleff's 2 brilliant books, which
he has another book on tyrants coming out.
Oh, great!
Which I have the manuscript of.
This is a good time for us to say to anybody listening to this, go out and buy Courageous Followership and Intelligent Disobedience, read them, and find out how you can incorporate them into the way you look at the world, because he's got a lot of really important things that we need as grown-ups, that our children need as people who are going to be grown-ups one day. And this is an important thing to have in our fundamental understanding of how society works.
I couldn't agree more.
Trump followers can't just point to Trump and say, well, he did it all, because he couldn't do it if they didn't empower him.
Yeah, which is the reality of all dictatorships, that they're supported by sufficient people. I mean, the amazing statistic from Nazi Germany is that 45% of medical doctors joined the Nazi Party. And to give some modern comparison, 4% of people in China belong to the Communist Party.
Wow.
So I have read. So this was it wasn't to advance their careers or what have you. And they then became part of the eugenics programs, the
Yeah.
Action T4 program to sterilize and murder
Mm.
hundreds of thousands of people.
Yeah.
And they proved absolutely that eugenics does not work
Hmm.
because they killed or sterilized anywhere up to 250,000 schizophrenics.
Hmm.
And Germany has a higher proportion of schizophrenics than 10 other countries against which it's been measured.
Right.
In fact, twice as many, as more than twice as many in the Mannheim district of Germany,
Hmm.
specifically. So it doesn't work. It's a disgusting approach to the problem, but one that was supported by George Bernard Shaw, by D.H. Lawrence, by Winston
Hmm.
Churchill, by Franklin Delano Roosevelt, by many, many people. Because of this simplistic idea, you can breed these conditions out. And then you find out these conditions are a lot more complicated than you thought. Schizophrenia may have combinations of, I think, 1,600 genes. It's not a gene. So, but the, people sign up to some ideology,
Hmm.
some authoritarian ideology,
Yeah.
and away they go.
Yeah.
Horrors occur.
And this becomes a feedback loop eventually. So that I think one of the great things about having spent so long doing this is that occasionally I get to watch groups start and then see how they develop rather than just discovering them after they have become their full-blown version.
Yeah.
And there is a kind of a feedback where it starts out with somebody who's kind of leaderish. He's people recognize he or she, yeah, they've got something there. Let's go along with that. And this person then amplifies, which causes the followers to amplify their faithfulness and their followership, which causes the leader to amplify his or her leadership. And it becomes this feedback loop of of intensification at both ends
Mm.
until you finally do get this godlike leader and these craven followers who will do pretty much anything and allow pretty much anything.
Yeah, I mean, looking at, say, Heaven's Gate and the development of that,
Yeah, yeah,
which is very well described by Janja Lelic
yeah,
in her book Bounded Choice.
yes.
Um, you have the Bo Peep cult, as they pretty much called themselves,
Hmm,
and you end up with this mad old man after the cult leader Bonnie Nettles has died. He's
yes.
continuing it, and you look at video of him, and he is crazy, and
And he has absorbed all of her power as well as his own.
yeah,
Yeah,
and you can see that he's senescent,
yeah.
he's senile, and so he decides he's going to take them with him. But first of all, they all have to be castrated.
Hmm,
You're kind of thinking, I don't think I'd do that. Yeah, that's a little bit extreme, all in all. And then they poison themselves so they can join the Hale-Bopp comet. And
yes.
I hope they managed to get where they wanted to go somehow. But the thought that you will mutilate yourself, and of
Hmm,
course that you have origin among the early Christians who thought that would be a good idea, but he did write very persuasively about what a bad idea it'd be afterwards. So bless him. But this idea that you will I was just mentioning to you Stolen Youth, the excellent documentary about the
yeah.
Larry Ray cult that grew out of Sarah Lawrence College in the US, very
Yeah.
prestigious place. And you can see, because there are recordings from close to his first contact with these students, and he just takes over this small group of people
Hmm,
and, as you said, amplifies it, escalates to the
yes.
point where they're all confessing to things they couldn't possibly have done. And there's film of him physically torturing one of the members, putting a thing on his tongue and clamping it in and saying, I'm going to rip your tongue in half, I'm
Yeah.
going to cut the testicles off, switch the camera off. So, God. That, and you're starting out and you're going, look, these are really, really bright 19-year-olds. They're at Sarah Lawrence, this is Ivy League. And yet, because he can find their emotional vulnerability,
Hmm,
and definitely you can hear some of the conversations, he's giving them confidence at the start. He's
yeah.
giving them something they want, and then he entraps them.
Yeah.
He isolates them and engulfs them in Alexandra Stein's words.
Yeah.
Yeah,
And this is something it keeps reshaping itself. So in some groups you see where it starts out it starts out seeming fairly innocent, but with a leader who's kind of exceptional. He or she is something extra. And then gradually he takes the whole group with him. New members slot in where the group is rather than at the beginning and having to catch up. Other situations, you find that each new member is brought in at a kind of a honeymoon period where they're a little bit set apart from the mainstream of the group while the leader is grooming them. That
yeah.
usually, in my experience, that usually happens with smaller groups.
Hmm.
And the leader grooms them to take their place among the rest of the group,
Hmm.
which is being systematically and thoroughly abused.
Yeah.
And that honeymoon period can last anywhere from 2 or 3 weeks to several months, but eventually they are knocked down and now they're just one of the crowd.
Yeah.
And all of a sudden they have been moved that little bit at a time to where this is normal. It's okay, it's okay if the leader beats me or threatens to kill me or rapes me or exploits me in some other way or pimps me out. Or 3 months ago they wouldn't have dreamt of it. 3 months ago they would have been straight out the door. But that grooming process has resulted in them just accepting, well, this is the next step of being a faithful follower.
Yeah, the dissonance comes in baby steps.
Yes.
Accept a little bit and go further. I mean, I don't know if you were there. I think it was the family support group or fair at the Royal College of Surgeons, and Brian Tully, a forensic psychologist, spoke, and I'd heard about him and suggested that he be asked to speak. And he was great. He's still around somewhere. But he basically was dealing with white collar criminals for the most part as a forensic police psychologist. And he'd say that just time and time again, the person would be sat before him and say, well, the boss just asked me to backdate this contract by a day. That's how it started.
Yes.
And it's like the mafia thing that we'll get you to do something. And now you've done it, and we'll tell on you if you don't go with us. You're caught by the short and curlers.
And it's that same process, no matter whether you're talking about a group of 100, a group of 1,000, or just a one-on-one. So it's the same process we hear about when people are being groomed on the internet to do sex photos of themselves or to meet with somebody who's in fact going to enslave them. It's the same process we find when an abusive partner will meet someone and make them think that they are the bee's knees, but in fact, this person is a narcissistic abuser and will turn them over eventually. It's that same little box of techniques that keeps being used and adapted in so many different ways, all designed to give the authority, the ultimate control to that one person at the expense of everyone else.
Yeah, and I mean, I think there's a fundamental problem, which is that our society is authoritarian, that we are trying to develop democracy.
Yeah.
We're not doing tremendously well. In fact, survey work about 3 or 4 years ago suggested that authoritarianism is definitely, it's not just Viktor Orban in Hungary or all over the world, these people who've had power. Some of them, like Bolsonaro, now gone, thankfully. But we've still got Xi, we've still got Putin. But we still, I think this is why our HLF's intelligent disobedience is so important, we still have a school system that is fundamentally authoritarian. It's not about the sharing of, it's not about being a community of learning. It's about stuff these facts in your head and we'll test you on them. And so, I mean, in the brilliant series, The Wire, one of the seasons was about the educational system in the US. And you've got this math teacher, Prabilsky, who he's worked out that the kids are interested in playing craps, so he can show them what the probabilities are
yeah,
of coming up with different numbers. And then he's told you mustn't do that because that's a bad thing. And what he ends up doing is teaching kids the answers to the SATs. They've got no idea what any of it means, but if they
yeah.
can just parrot that information, I think we've pushed too much into that and away from, my feeling about school was that it was there to kill curiosity. It was to bore you to, and I'm a very curious person in more ways than one. And I couldn't function in that system. I'm fascinated by life. I don't want this slow, boring kind of gruel to be fed to me that I've got to memorize. I want to be finding something out. And I think, of course, many schools have managed to break away from that. But things like our national curriculum in this country, they, it stops the creativity, which is the foundation of learning, that sense of fascination. And we're expected, and authority is not a bad thing. Let's make that clear, that you
Yeah,
can have expert authority. Somebody actually knows what they're talking about. We have some expertise, some authority on this subject, having spent decades being involved with it. And so from time to time, we'll say something might be useful to somebody, but you then have rank authority, the idea that somebody should be listened to because they're a Supreme Court judge, or, they're a brigadier general or field marshal, or a school teacher, and, and for me, they're just two quite different things. The one, you're authoritative, you understand what you're talking about. The other, you're authoritarian. You,
yeah,
you just, you don't have anything useful to contribute generally.
yeah. And we have to allow for the fact that there are some people we we end up trusting because they actually know what they're talking about something that we don't. So, I used the example last time. I would rather have a brain surgeon do my brain surgery than the local plumber, because as good as the local plumber may be at plumbing, he's going to have a hard time dealing with the human brain.
Hmm.
He's just not equipped for that.
You might be able to sort your waterworks out, but probably not your.
You
That,
know,
that expression seems to have gone 20 or 30 years ago when men talked about down there. It was always that waterworks.
yes.
But yeah,
Isn't that
absolutely.
a square on the Monopoly board, the waterworks?
Oh dear. Okay, so
Yes.
um, that's authoritarianism.
Yeah.
You
Well,
want to?
I think the way I use authoritarianism as well is to talk about the degrees, because
Mm,
I think even when we talk about someone who is authoritative, I think there are different ways of being authoritative.
mm.
And I think that being authoritative, you can do it the wrong way, so that you forget that your job, if you are truly authoritative, your job is to work yourself out of a job.
Yeah, to share the information you have.
Your
Absolutely.
job is to make the other person, as I've marked it out here, interdependent,
Mm,
so that he goes through the stages of getting away from authoritarianism to the place where he's able to be independent, but then realizes I can actually be interdependent. I can be sufficiently trusting of my own independence
mm,
that I can work in conjunction with other people.
mm.
I can acknowledge that I know how to do job A pretty well. So, in a sense, I can be independent. But on the other hand, there are other people who also can do job A. We can learn from each other. We can cooperate together. And that's part of the basis of society, of a healthy society. A healthy society means that I can sit down with people who know what I know, but maybe know some parts of it better than I do.
Yeah.
And they can teach me. I may know something better than they do, and I can teach them.
Mm,
And we can work as teams inside of a larger team, this thing called society.
mm,
And nobody's threatened, and nobody's overwhelmed, and nobody's crushed. It's just a healthy way to exist.
mm.
It's possible, however, to be authoritative in a way that smothers that movement that I've
Yeah.
diagrammed, that movement up to interdependence. I've seen people here in Abingdon. There was a fellow who knows a lot about, huge amount about British wines and British cheeses from back, decades ago when nobody really thought that the British knew how to make cheese or wine. And he was a champion of the quality British cheeses that we all take for granted today.
Hmm.
The trouble was, everybody had to do it his way.
Yeah.
And, that's too bad. Now,
Hmm.
fortunately, we've moved beyond that. And now it's just taken for granted. Why would you get cheddar cheese from anywhere else except cheddar?
Though, of course, it's not called cheddar if it comes from cheddar.
Well, you know what I mean, though.
But
You know,
or with Stilton, that I think is the only patented cheese. So only the
okay.
13 creameries that make it can use the name. But so it's I can't remember what it's called, but the real cheddar cheese. I've been there,
Hmm.
been to the place where it's made. It's not
I've
called
driven
cheddar.
past it.
Yeah, somewhere near Bath.
Yes, I am not one of those people who knows a lot about it. I just happen to know the history. I heard about the history of a little, not even a conflict really, but a little falling out between people over this authoritative person who was impatient with people who didn't come round to his way of
Mm.
seeing it quickly enough. He
And
meant well. He did a lot of good,
mm.
but he made it hard for people to move up to interdependence. They had to fight with him to get there. Um, and I think that's something that we have to be careful of, especially as people who know a little bit about what we're talking about.
Yeah.
It's that little safeguard in the head that says, you know what, my job is to work myself out of a job.
Yeah, so
And
so everybody understands what we're
yeah,
talking about, and everybody can have this discussion.
yeah,
And the things that we're talking about are, having spent 40 years doing this, they're really not very complicated.
none
And
of
they are things that we can teach to children. And why aren't we? You
yeah,
know, we really, again, intelligent disobedience is a good start. Teaching kids to be assertive, teaching kids that they can say what they feel, that it's safe, that they can
mhm,
contribute, and that their intelligence is valuable. They're not
yes.
going to have to have these certificates before they can make a wise suggestion. In fact, some of the cleverest things I've ever heard have come from 3-year-olds, but you know,
Well, this is another aspect of understanding authoritarianism, I think, in encouraging our young people to recognize that there are certain things that authoritarians do
mm,
that an authoritative person wouldn't do.
yeah,
Like saying, well, you should be reading my books and not fact checking me or not asking certain kinds of questions or not going behind my back as if you could, going behind my back and seeing if other people agree with me.
mm,
That should be a red flag.
mm,
If somebody if somebody criticizes a person who is simply asking a challenging question or is fact checking or comes back and says, that thing that you said 2 weeks ago about blah, 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 blah. Well, I was reading something else about this guy who actually, also studies this subject.
mm.
And he's actually said that maybe this is a bad idea.
Well, he's an idiot.
Yeah, he's an idiot. Or, well, he doesn't know what he's talking about. Or, why were you reading that?
Yeah.
I know I've mentioned before when we've talked that I knew somebody whose family was a member of, well, they were a member of the Worldwide Church of God. Let's just say it.
Mm,
Uh, Herbert W. Armstrong, the plain truth. Um, and their local minister used to come to their house and check their bookshelves for unapproved books, used to question them on what they watched on television, whether they listened to the radio or not, whether they read newspapers or not, used to closely examine them on all of these kinds of
mm,
things. And they had to answer questions that were really deeply personal,
mm.
which just should never happen.
I belong to a group that asked questions that were really deeply personal. Hundreds
Yes,
of
you
them.
did. Yes, you did. But at least they didn't come to your house and do a search, I think.
Well, they would have
Or
done
did.
if a couple of times my house was broken into by Scientologists. So
Oh, that's true.
I don't
Yes,
know how much they searched, but
that's true.
yeah, that um, control over other people's lives.
Yes.
Um, My time is short.
Okay, let's talk about extremism because extremism likewise is very important. And as you can see, I've demarcated the opposite of extremism is complexity because
Mm.
for me, the one of the main hallmarks of extremism is that everything gets boiled down to a simple black and white. So whereas, if I go to my local astronomy society, or I go to a public lecture at the university, or I go to one of the local churches, or you know, any normal group of people, I can go and I can ask a question,
Mm.
and it can be any kind of question. I can have I can have a ding dong argument with other astronomers about whether or not Pluto really should have been demoted, and everybody's got an opinion.
Oh, Pluto. Sorry.
And yes, that Pluto, and everybody's allowed to have that opinion, and that's okay. In extremism, at the very minimum, a question equals a doubt.
Mm.
You're not just wondering,
Mm.
you're doubting the leader, you're doubting the official teaching. But that's not the end of it. Doubt means you must not be a believer. It doesn't mean you're wondering, it
Mm.
means you've already fallen off the edge.
Yeah.
And unbelief is some kind of rebellion or sin or evil or suppressive purpose. Just look in the group and find
Evil purpose for
evil purpose.
Scientology. Yep.
Just look in the group and find the snarl word, and they're all connected. They all start at asking a question, and they run the gamut right down to the end of being a bad human being.
Yeah. Hi, John here. Thanks for watching. We'd appreciate it very much if you would click like, as well as subscribe, and click the bell for notifications. Every dollar helps, and we welcome new patrons on Patreon, or you can make a one-off payment with any currency through PayPal. Thanks so much.